All right. Testing 3, 4, 5. Okay, you got that.
Two minutes until showtime. One minute until showtime.
Still got you, John?
Yep, I'm still here. Yeah,
All
just
right.
preparing. Yeah.
Everything sounds good here.
Yeah, great.
And recording for YouTube here too.
Your show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Blog Talk Radio.
Now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is a very real prospect of a new world order.
The New World Order does not mean surrendering our national sovereignty or forfeiting our interests.
He took an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States of America. By some, he's been called controversial.
How can I convince you when your ears refuse to hear? You turn your heart away from me each time that I draw near. Your eyes refuse to meet with mine, they glance away in fear.
Now, keep in mind that some of my guests have been approached by Homeland Security or FBI saying, why are you going on the Clay Douglas show?
My message to those guys, if they're listening this morning, is go get a cup of coffee. Maybe you'll learn something.
We both took the same oath, to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I don't recall there being an expiration date on that.
Well, it doesn't show. How can I contain this anguish and this pain? Knowing that your eyes are blinded by the lies.
He is the free American Clay Douglas. Catch the Free American weekdays at 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Eastern.
Every time I think about the damage that's been done, the anger wells inside me till I'm almost overcome. I want to tear the moon out of the sky and stop the sun. When I reach the home, I got me
For the podcast and more details, visit www.freeamerican.com or catch the podcast by phone by calling 832-999-8621. Or catch the podcast by phone by calling 832-998-8621.
All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the Free American. I'm your host, I'm Clay Douglas, and my guest today is John DeNugent. Hello, John.
Good morning to you, Clay.
I'm really glad to have you on my show today because what we're going to be discussing here, I think, is a part of hidden history, and we can call that the Nameless War. This is you are doing the audio book of Captain Ramsey's, Captain Archibald Ramsey's 1952, The Nameless War. The Nameless War tells who was really behind key revolutions in Western history, 1600, and how these evil revolutions succeeded in overthrowing powerful governments and destroying or harming societies. So anyone interested in getting rid of the Zionist tyranny over the Western world can learn from this book, which has been very popular since it first appeared in London in 1952. In a nutshell, Ramsey says, Jewish revolution takes money to pay for agents, a strategy to paralyze the government so it does not act vigorously at the decisive moment to defend itself, and 3, meanwhile, the people must be divided up and too busy fighting each other to notice the government is being overthrown. I'd say that's an excellent description of what's happening in the United States right now. Well, I'm all for Israel. Well, the Bible says, well, you can't do that. What are you, anti-government? Oh, you're anti-Semitic. It is and I've told people for 20 years that the key to what they do is divide and conquer, one of the oldest maxims in warfare. And I hopefully will be able to get this show and your audio book available in some of the truck stops and some of the stores around the country that are carrying rock and roll. I mean, I would say truckers would get tired of listening to the same kind of music on the same CD. And if they got a choice and they can listen to this show and people like you on this show and your work about creating the audio book of Captain Ramsey's book, I think this is a step forward in the right direction.
Yeah, well, I think you're absolutely right. I think truckers are more important than I fully realized before. Some truckers, of course, are just employees, but others are independent. Some of them make decent money. And a trucker is sort of an independent-minded person, kind of like a biker, like the community you come from. They roam around the country, and they see different parts, and they meet different people. And they can quit working for one person or work for somebody else, and they can make decent money. And many of them are patriots. And it's a shame if they can only listen to Michael Savage or Rush Limbaugh. They should know that the full truth is out there, not just a half truth or the quarter truth. The kind of stuff that Michael Savage says. Michael Savage, for example, he's a Jew who talks a lot about black crime, or he talks about Islam. Okay, well, it's all true, but it's only half the story. And there are a lot of truckers. I have a friend, by the way, who was a full-blown whistleblower on the New World Order. He worked for Ted Gunderson, the famous FBI high official who became a whistleblower after he retired. And he talked about a lot of important things, including satanic abductions of children and many other things. Anyways, he was tired of being poor because the J team kept him poor for many, many years, and he became a trucker. And now he's finally making money, and he doesn't call any man his boss. I mean, he has to pay when his, $3,000 to get his transmission fixed, and he has big bills from time to time. But other times, he's got lots of money. I think a lot of patriots don't understand you can make money as a trucker. It's a hard work and it's a lonely life, unless you got a wife who can go with you, of course. You're on the road all the time.
Well, the truckers organized that trip to Washington, D.C. and almost closed Washington, D.C. down for a day. So they've got some organization, and they are obviously patriotic.
Mm-hmm. A lot of them are. You can see them flying the American flag, and they go around the country. They're not isolated. They're not stuck in one little small town. The small town mindset, but they see what's going on everywhere. Well, I appreciate you having me on today, Clay. I wanted to talk about Captain Archibald Mole Ramsey, who was a Scottish aristocrat and member of the British Parliament for 14 years, of which 4 were spent in prison. He was a war hero in World War I, and he turned against the Jews. So Winston Churchill rammed through a law when World War II broke out called Regulation 18B, which completely suspended Magna Carta and the Bill of Rights and said, because of the war and this great emergency, we have to fight and destroy Germany, which is a great threat, and there is against freedom and blah, blah, blah. So we can arrest you. We can hold you forever without evidence, trial, and you have no right to a lawyer. And England, the country which, all the propaganda at that time was, England is fighting bravely against the Nazi tyranny, and England is fighting for democracy, and all this good stuff. And under 18B, they arrested over 1,000 top British patriots and held them without any charges, any lawyer, any evidence. In other words, you didn't even have a hearing in court. They just threw you in a cell. And this member of Parliament, Captain Ramsey, who fought in World War I, he'd been with the Coldstream Guards, which is my English grandfather's ancestors were in the Coldstream Guard. They're the people that guard Buckingham Palace. And, the changing of the guard, the big black furry hats and the red uniforms, that's the Coldstream Guards. In World War I, he was with the Coldstream Guards. He graduated from Eton, which is the ultimate private school in England. 19 prime ministers of England have gone there, including the current one, David Cameron. And then he graduated from Sandhurst, which is legendary. It's like the West Point of Great Britain. And he graduated there and fought in World War I, got a severe head wound with the Coldstream Guards in the Western Front fighting the Germans. And then he was in the War Office, and then he was in business, and then he ran for Parliament from Edinburgh, Scotland, right next to Edinburgh, the capital. And he's an interesting guy, Clay, because he's like all of us. At first, you suspect something's wrong. You can't put your finger on what it is. You're being lied to, but you don't know who's doing it. And you don't know how far the lies go. And gradually he began to realize it's the bankers. And then comes the real puzzling part. These are bankers of capitalists who are also supporting communism. Wait a minute. Why would a capitalist support communism? We as Englishmen and Americans are thought that don't make no sense. And then he began to say, well, what kind of banker would support Marxists? It's the opposite, isn't it? It's not if you're a Jew and these are two different ways to simultaneously destroy white Western Christian society.
And the banker's secret has always been to fund both sides of every conflict. And if one side isn't strong enough to stand against the other side, they'll fund them. And that's exactly what they did. Jacob Schiff funded Marx and Lenin. He funded communism. That was a New York banker.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's this false dichotomy. When it comes to Jews, a Jewish banker will support communism. Now, you'd think, well, but if the communists come to power, they'll cut the banker's throat. God, if he's a Jew, they won't. No, because he helped them. It's all just different. In other words, different ways. In other words, get the right wing, like Republican types, to be anti-communist, and then get the left wing types foaming at the mouth about something else as being the threat. Like the right wing is the threat, the capital, Wall Street is the threat, but the Jews are both Wall Street and the communists. And people just can't imagine that level of evil, that sophistication. And so Captain Ramsey was great because he wrote this 100-page book, and he broke it down because he was a politician and he'd been a combat officer leading his men into combat. And he understood you got to break it down, you got to make it simple so people get it. And so he starts off, he discusses the English Revolution, which was when Oliver Cromwell, these people rose up in the 1600s, 1640s, and overthrew the king and chopped his head off. It's very shocking. It never happened before. The king's head was chopped off. And then he tried to bring the Jews into England, and as Captain Ramsey points out, the Dutch Jews, they'd been thrown out of Spain in 1492, went to Holland, kept making money, and they said to Cromwell, "You need money? Tell you what, kid, you let us back into England, you get all the money you need." And that is the huge scandal behind Oliver Cromwell. And then he goes into the French Revolution, all the suspicious things about that. And, my distant ancestors were French. And I was actually born on July 14. That's my birthday. It's also the day that the French mob stormed the Bastille prison, which is also an arsenal, with 40,000 pounds of gunpowder in it. That's what they're after, not the prisoners. And it's the national holiday of France now because the French Revolution began, and they started the process, led to the overthrowing of the king, and his head was also chopped off, that and his wife, Queen Mary Antoinette. And the question is, what were the royal troops doing while this mob is attacking the Bastille prison? They're standing there scratching their testicles. And that's the paralysis. That's, in other words, no government wants to be overthrown. And particularly, the first thing you saw in the mob action at the overthrowing of the Bastille prison, where they had the 40,000, the mob was after the gunpowder, because it was an organized mob. Somebody was organizing the mob. And the first thing they did when some of the soldiers surrendered is they chopped their heads off and put them on pikes, which is like a super long spear, like a 15-foot long spear. And so the king obviously is very afraid. This is not people who want reforms. They want to kill me, and they want to kill my wife, and they want to start slaughtering people. So why are the royal troops across the street just sitting there? And so this is the paralysis which Captain Ramsey describes. At the decisive moment, key parts of your government forces just do nothing. They don't react. Or they wait 4 hours before they make their first move, deliberately, by which time it's then too late. It says, "I'm sorry, we were too late, we were on our break or something." We were on coffee break when the revolution broke out, so we couldn't come, And so he goes into fascinating details. And over again, he says, there are suspicious characters lurking around the edges of these revolutions. People, nobody knows who they are. But what they do tend to have in common is they tend to have very swarthy Mediterranean skin, and they tend to have hooked noses. And they're there at every key event. And one of the things, because I lived in France, I found the French to be very nice people. In fact, in Clay, you grew up in Texas now, didn't you?
I did.
Okay, well, most boys, I'm sure in Texas and elsewhere, get at least one or two fist fights in their life. And, boys, when we were kids, used to play cowboys and Indians or army soldier or whatever. And, boys like guns and stuff. Warlike. The average Frenchman, I don't think, has one fist fight in his entire life. French are very peaceful people. I mean, they just want to make love, not war. They're funny, they're witty, they're friendly, they're very intelligent, they're patriotic. They'll fight and die for their country.
And great wine.
But they're not
they make great wine, too. And that's not
yeah, $2 a bottle for great wine. I lived over there 2004, 2005. Half the country is growing grapes. It was funny. I mean, all the stereotypes are true about the French. They love women. Women love men too over there. Great food. They're friendly. They're funny. They're witty, but they're not vicious. And the French Revolution is full of vicious, horrible atrocities. And every one of these atrocities, there's this guy named Maillard who shows up, and he's there every time something horrible happens. And just like with ISIS over there in Syria and Iraq, where somebody's head is being cut off with a knife and stuck on a pike, he's there. He's like instigating people. He's whipping up the mob. He's a mysterious guy. You look at the Wikipedia article on this Maillard, and they don't even say where he's born or anything about the guy. He's a mystery man, but suddenly he's there, and he has very dark skin like an Arab. And you look at somebody drew like a pencil drawing of the guy. He's got this huge hooked nose, and that's what Ramsey's saying. This is, you think this revolution is about Parliament wants more rights from the king, or something innocuous like seemingly a good cause. In reality, somebody else has another agenda, and you may start the revolution for freedom or law and order or whatever you think it is, to stop some scandals or corruption. But somebody else is backing your revolution because he's going to take it many steps beyond that, and he wants to start wiping out the leadership of that country and install a Jewish-controlled government. So,
isn't that exactly, John? Isn't that exactly what happened in the Ukraine? And by the way, the Ukraine was formerly the land of the Khazars. That was Khazaria, and they've taken out the ruling party, the government there, and replaced it with Jews.
Well, 100%. It's just absolutely amazing. Now, there were legitimate grievances because Ukraine had a lot of corruption in the post-Soviet period. Yanukovych was lining his pockets. I saw a picture of his mansion. It's disgusting, The Germans some German private built him a mansion, and it's just huge. So, they built him a palace. And so he was corrupt. So the people were unhappy, but there's a lot of corruption, not just, this is a pro-Russian guy. Russian was his native language. A third of Ukraine speaks Russian. They are Russians. That's why Russia has an interest in Ukraine, because a third of the people in Ukraine are simply Russians. So, but the point is, there's lots of corruption. So anyways, a revolution is triggered. Next thing you know, Putin was involved, and they said, this corrupt president of Russia, Yanukovych, he'll resign within 30 days, and there'll be new elections. But that wasn't enough. So they overthrew the government anyways, even though the guy they objected to said he was going to leave. And he knew he was unpopular. They overthrew the government. In comes a Jewish chocolate billionaire. He makes chocolate, named Poroshenko, big fat guy. And then in comes, as the mayor of Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, a prize fighter, a heavyweight boxing champion named Klitschko. He and his brother, twin brother, both box. So that qualifies you to be the mayor of the capital of a major country in Europe with 45 million people, that you were a boxer. No, what qualified him is he was a Jew. Klitschko. He's a huge Jew. And a lot of Jews are short, but this guy wasn't, almost 7 feet tall. And then the prime minister, Yatsenyuk, is another Jew. So you have a complete. So it started off, let's have reforms to get rid of corruption. In the end, everybody's a Jew at the top of the government. So this is a new example of what Ramsey's talking about. The Jews see popular unrest. They say, okay, let's fund it, let's take it over, let's control it, and in the end, the people, they think they're fighting for their freedom and justice. In the end, they're going to get something very different. They're going to get what we want out of this revolution. And that's what Captain Ramsey is talking about. I mean, one of the most horrifying things, especially to me, a distant French ancestry. I majored in French at Georgetown. My second wife was French, married her for 3 years. And she was a nice woman. We just incompatible in different ways. We met online and, you know, we broke up eventually. But, I mean, she was a nice person. She had nice friends. French are great people. But one of the incidents was that the mob, instigated by this Maillard, stormed the palace where the royal family in Paris was living, the Tuileries Palace. And a princess, she's very pretty, blonde, blue-eyed gal, named the Princess de Lamballe, Lamball. She had come to be with her friend, the Queen, Marie Antoinette, in her hour of need. She was very afraid to come back. In fact, she had fled to England, and she wrote out a will at that point, fearing she'd die if she went back to France. But she had promised her friend, Queen Marie Antoinette, I'll come back there and be there with you no matter what happens. She did. So the mob seized her. They stripped her naked. They cut her breasts off with knives. They stuck her head on a pike. And then they held the pike with the head up in front of the window that Marie Antoinette was looking out of.
Pretty
so
incredibly
head of her friend.
Evil people, huh?
And this is not at all the way the French are. I'm telling you, you know, the French are just not a warlike, sadistic, savage people. I mean, you know, I'll give you a little just example. Okay, sometimes Americans can be a little abrupt and a little rude and direct. On the street, as soon as people say to me, hey, where is such and such a street? You know, a Frenchman would say, you should say, excuse me, because, you know, I'm walking, I'm doing my business, and you're actually interrupting me, buddy. So why don't you say, excuse me, can you tell me where? So, okay, that's what a Frenchman would say. In fact, a Frenchman would say, excusez-moi de vous déranger. Excuse me for disturbing you, sir. Would you be so kind as to tell me where, you know, the Rue de Lafayette is, you know, the street, okay? And if you politely address a Frenchman and say, excuse me for disturbing you, sir, would you be so kind as to tell me? You know what a Frenchie will do? He'll take you by the elbow and he'll walk you there himself. He'll stop what he's doing and he'll take you there. Especially if you're a foreigner, don't speak the language well, and you look bewildered. He will escort you right to your goal because you started off politely. I mean, that's how the French are. They're big on style and on class. And unlike in America, you know, I had a very wealthy friend in Palm Beach. She knew Donald Trump, and she said, you know, the sad thing about America is, you know, if you're wealthy, you're invited to parties. If you lose your money, even if it was stolen from you, you're no longer invited to parties. You're not interested because you're not rich anymore. And she says, and that's not how Europe is. You know, a friend is a friend. Whether you have money or you're broke, you're still invited to parties. If you're polite and you're witty and you add to the conversation, and you're a loyal friend, you know, you're always there. So I found the French to be very nice people, very peaceful people. They're not warlike like the Germans or Americans and Brits. And they don't run around cutting people's heads off, for God's sake. They're really refined, is the way I would use. So, but the French Revolution, many suspicious things are happening. to connect this to America, the Marquis de Lafayette was, as we used to know in America, the Marquis de Lafayette sailed over from France to help us in our revolution. Young man, idealistic, disobeyed a direct order from King Louis XVI to not get involved. His struggle between the British and the Americans. We just had a war with England, still licking our wounds from that. We got beat, and we don't want to get involved. But he was worth about $300 million. He bought a warship in Portugal. He took a crew down there to Portugal. He just sailed for America from Portugal to help the American Revolution. George Washington was unable to have children. Nobody knows why, because Martha, his wife, had kids in a previous marriage. She was a widow. But he kind of adopted the Marquis de Lafayette like a son. And he came at the lowest fortunes of the French Revolution. He was there at Valley Forge when everybody was starving and the American army was broke. And so they became very close, and he was a key aide and supporter and commander under Washington throughout the American Revolution, this Frenchie, and an aristocrat fighting for America's freedom. So he was a hero, and he came back to Paris. And he was the Marquis, a very wealthy man, castles and everything. Now, when the French Revolution broke out in 1789, many people thought it was going to be like the American Revolution. In other words, there'd be no atrocities, although unfortunately the British did commit some atrocities in the Southern campaign, in the Carolinas and in Virginia, North and South Carolina. But in general, there weren't a lot of atrocities in the American Revolution. Nobody was cutting off heads and sticking them on pikes. There were Tories, in the American 13 colonies there. They stayed loyal to England, and they were just thrown out of their houses. Sometimes their houses were burned down in a few cases. But nobody was cutting people's heads off. Nobody was cutting the heads off women, sticking it on a pike. Not in the American Revolution. But in the French Revolution, from the first day, with the storming of the Bastille, these soldiers surrendered and came out. Their heads were chopped off. Outrageous. What is going on here? Who is instigating the mob to do such things? The Jews. And so the Marquis de Lafayette was appalled at the violence of the Paris mob. And the second big incident was the Women's March to Versailles, because the royal palace is 17 miles outside of Paris. So capital is technically Paris, but the king and his court were all at Versailles, because he was afraid of, he wanted to be outside in his gorgeous, huge, famous palace. So a mob forms. It ends up being, in the end, like 10,000 women armed with clubs and knives. Women armed with clubs and knives? That's interesting. And then they march out, and we're going to take the king and his wife and the kids, and we're going to drag them back to Paris, where we can control them and keep an eye on them. So the Marquis de Lafayette, who's at that point the head of the National Guard, he is persuaded, go with these women, and you can exert your influence because you're still, you're a national hero because you helped the American Revolution and you're famous and defeated England and all that stuff. So he went along, but he was appalled at the violence in this crowd. And that's what Captain Ramsey is saying. There could be a good cause that the people are angry about something. But the Jew sees it and says, how can I use this? And I will use my professional instigators. And one of the things which struck me, and it's typical of the Jewish methods, is vicious attacks on the character of key people. Now, with the Princess de Lamballe, this is a beautiful woman, friend of Queen Marie Antoinette. So what did they say about her? She was a lesbian. So these two women are friends, so therefore they're lesbians. Huh? How could they be? Plenty of women are friends. oh, these women are constantly seen together. That's because they're lesbians, and this was a defamation. And the mob tried to make Marie Antoinette kiss the lips of the severed head of her friend, the Princess de Lamballe. Monstrous. Monstrous. Absolutely monstrous. And many other vicious defamations of the royal family. It was designed to cause a level of hatred. Now, the other thing, many people remember, it was said of Queen Marie Antoinette that there was a food shortage and people were hungry, and the price of bread tripled in Paris. The poor could only afford, bread. They couldn't afford much meat or anything. Bread and soup and whatnot. Apple now and then. And so there was a perception that Queen Marie Antoinette was living high on the hog. She didn't care about the poor. Okay. So what the Jews did is they said, okay, this is the perception. How can we exploit this? What rumor, what lie can we tell and spread that will fit that perception? And people say, yeah, I'm sure it's true, That's just the kind of thing she would do. And so they spread the rumor that some lady in waiting had told the queen, Marie Antoinette, the peasants lack bread. And then supposedly the queen replied, famously, I remember reading about this as a kid, the peasants have no bread? Then let them eat cake. Ha 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 ha. And that was supposed to be witty. And that was spread all over France by somebody. And she never said it.
That is a Jewish tactic. And right after my book, Mystery Babylon, The New World Order Unveiled, came out, exposing the Mossad's drug-running operation together with George Bush and his partner Manuel Noriega, I walked into a biker bar and they immediately turned on me, ran me out. I wasn't allowed to go to any of the club's runs or functions or anything because somebody told them that I was selling that book to give money to a snitch named Huevos. Never heard of him, never saw him, didn't give money to anybody. So it was just a rumor that somebody started and spread. That's and it was to keep me from educating the bikers with Mystery Babylon.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Hitler wrote in Mein Kampf that Schopenhauer, the great German philosopher, said it best. The Jews are the great masters of the lie. They study the art of lying. In other words, when you create a lie, it has to go with the flow of people's suspicions that they already have. For example, there's a lie all over the internet that I'm a wife beater. Okay, now that's a good lie because I was in the Marines, I have a big square jaw and I have muscles, and there are pictures of me firing guns. So yeah, you could tell he's brutal, he's one of those crazy Marines, all effed up, probably fought Vietnam, came back all violent and whatnot, and beats women. So that's a good lie to stick on me. And if I were some pansy like Tiny Tim or something, or that Karma Chameleon singer, Boy George or something, that wouldn't be a good lie. Nobody believed Boy George would beat up his girlfriend. But for me, so they tailor make the lie to you. And they say, okay, what's the lie which will rile people up? Okay, to a biker community, this guy's a snitch. And if you buy it, so this is a twofer. You destroy Clay's reputation, and you destroy sales of his book, because if you don't have money, you write a book, you spend years writing a book, and then nobody buys it. You've lost all that time. Nobody's read your book. You didn't get any money to pay your bills, and you're penurious. So it's a twofer or a threefer.
Well,
and you're thrown out of the bars.
I wrote two books, kind of as a follow-up to John D. MacDonald's Travis McGee series. I was a fan. I read every one of his books. And I came out with it. But none of the publishers would even look at it. None of them wanted to handle it. So, I had to self-publish it, which doesn't, you don't reach many people when you're blocked in libraries and corporations or the VA. I mean, the people that I talk to in the VA can't even read one of my books because it's blocked.
Yeah, my website is blocked too, DeNugent.com. Well, Captain Ramsey, I think, says some very, very important things here. And the fact that Winston Churchill threw him in jail for 4 years without charges, without trials, without evidence. I mean, he's a member of Parliament. The thing which is really piquant about the whole deal, for me especially, I've got a little bit of Scottish ancestry myself, but the Scots are very brave people. Captain Ramsey was a very brave man. He was a captain in the Coldstream Guards in World War I. He was a leader, and he was attracting other of the finest people in the leadership class of England. He created something called the Right Club, because I guess they had the right ideas, or if they were right wing, whatever. And it was to maintain peace between the British Empire and Germany, and avoid World War II. And he attracted top people, such as the 5th Duke of Wellington, descendant of, the famous Duke of Wellington of the Battle of Waterloo, who was very anti-Jewish. He was the chairman of the Right Club. And another key person, this is a big fish to be reeled in, Sir Barry Domville, who was an admiral in the Royal Navy. He had commanded a squadron in the Mediterranean. He had been the director of naval intelligence for the Royal Navy. And he was then the dean of the Royal Naval College in, Greenwich, England, which is, of course, where, the longitude and latitude and Greenwich Mean Time and all that's a little town there in the coast of England. So he was a very prestigious, and he just like Captain Ramsey, woke up gradually more and more. Something mysterious is going on in our society. Strange things are happening in our politics. I see Parliament voting for stuff which is harming the country, and everybody knows it is, and yet everybody's just trooping in and voting that way. And it's like there's a secret power. And so Captain Ramsey and his people would meet. They had a club, and they had would meet also at a place called the Russian Tea Room. And the daughter of a Russian aristocrat, Anna Volkov, the family had fled from Russia when the Bolsheviks came to power. And so the Russian Tea Room was a meeting place for everybody who was against communism, and realizing who was behind the communists was the Jews. In fact, 80% of them were Jews. It became a very, very anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish meeting place. Well, one of the people that they met there was a young American whom I had the privilege of meeting in the 1980s, named Tyler Kent. And I imagine, have you ever heard of Tyler Kent?
No, I hadn't until I started reading your book here. And I've got a film here from Robert Harris report on Tyler Kent for BBC Newsnight, 1982.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think he was when I met him in 1987, he was sort of, I think, a bitter old man. 1986, he died a year later. He'd had a very hard life. He was a wonderful American patriot from a fine family, gone to Princeton, studied many foreign languages. His father had been in the State Department. And so he had been his first job himself in the State Department, with all his language, had been to be a code clerk at the U.S. Embassy in London. Well, I'm sorry, in Moscow. His first posting was to Moscow, because Franklin D. Roosevelt had opened diplomatic relations with the Soviet Union. I mean, America for 13 years, more than that, 15 years, had no relations with the Soviet Union, because the proclaimed purpose of the Soviet Union was to conquer the world, overthrow freedom, free enterprise economy, destroy religion. And so the United States felt no need to recognize such a criminal, psychopathic government. And, under Wilson and Harding and Coolidge and Herbert Hoover. There was no recognition of the Soviet Union. It was considered a bunch of monsters had taken over a major country. That's how it was viewed.
All right.
And we didn't have.
We've got a caller here that wants to come on. I want to let him have a chance to speak and ask you a question. I've got more questions for you about Captain Ramsey, but let's see who is calling us from 336 area code. Hello, who do we have here?
Hi, my name is Jamie Anderson. How are you two gentlemen doing today?
We're great. But that could be a rumor I started. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I do want to appreciate you for having John on the show. That's good. I do appreciate your kind words on truckers and all. And the reason I really like this book, and it's one of my absolute favorite books of all time, is it shows how Ramsey kind of goes from something's wrong to, I want to figure out what it is, to it's the banks, till, hey, it's the Jews, hey, let's get everyone else involved. And one primary thing I learned from the book, that's a blueprint of how the Jews work together to take over governments, to do whatever. Not only is that a good blueprint for them, I believe it could be a good blueprint for us as well. And I want to know what you and John think about that.
Well, I have made the comment, somebody said, why do you hate the Jews? I said, I don't hate them. I almost admire them because of us white boys, if us Englishmen, if us Caucasians had it as together as the Jews, we'd own the Bank of England, we'd own the Federal Reserve, we'd own the International Monetary Fund, and there wouldn't be any wars.
I tend to agree with that.
Well, I think, as I pointed out in my summary, the first thing you need is money, lots of money. If you're going to overthrow, in other words, let's say the Jews want to overthrow an important country. They don't want to overthrow Liechtenstein or, Andorra or something, or Honduras. They want to overthrow a major country to really advance their agenda. Well, it takes money. The government of a powerful country is going to be a powerful government. They're going to have a kind of FBI to watch out for spies and revolutionaries. They're going to have army. They're going to have cops, and they're going to have loyal citizens defending it too. So the first thing you have to have is money to spread around, because some people you can't convince to join your revolution or the plot. You got to bribe them, or what you need is private detectives to dig up dirt on politicians. Say, if you won't join us and you won't take bribes, fine, we'll destroy you through this file of dirt we have on your personal life.
Or we'll just shoot you like they did Kennedy, who wasn't going along with it.
Right, you couldn't block Kennedy, but you could shoot him.
Absolutely. That's why we need a George Soros billionaire in our movement. That's what we need worse than anything, is a billionaire in our movement.
Yeah, it'd be nice
if we can get that. I think. Right.
If
because
I could trust
more
Trump,
than $2 or $3 billion.
Yeah. Perot is still around.
Ross Perot, he did the best he could, no doubt about that. But I'm not sure he was really on our side. I'm really not sure about Trump either, because his son married a Jew, his daughter married a Jew, she's converted to Judaism, so who knows?
Well,
it could be
it's hard to say.
It's at least Trump is telling the truth about the illegals. He has just said that he would boot out the Syrian refugees that are being brought in now.
Mm-hmm. And he said he would stop.
I look at Trump like he makes it by his time. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, what? Repeat that. Repeat that, I didn't catch that.
Maybe we
I
lost
said Trump
reception.
can buy us 20 years by Trump can buy us 20 years by deporting everybody. That would help us. So, But it seems like we got a bad signal, so I'll let you gentlemen go. I appreciate the show. Thank you very, very much.
All right, thank you. And
Great.
folks,
Thank
if
you
you,
very
if you
much.
like the show,
Yes, sir.
go to freeamerican.com and make a donation. We certainly can use the help.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you. Yeah, well, yeah, it's interesting about Trump. You just wonder if Trump is the puppet. A friend of mine wrote me. He says, you know, I remember back when George Wallace was running and he was going to save the white race, and he didn't even talk about race. Didn't talk about the Jews. He just talked about pointy-headed intellectuals who can't park their tricycles straight, and you know, sort of a working class thing. But he won the Michigan primary, Democratic primary. I think it was 1968 or 72, and he was going great guns. But then he got shot, and next thing you know, he was apologizing to the blacks and saying, "I love y'all," and and he just completely collapsed and went along with everything. And then you had Ronald Reagan. You know, my dad was all filled with, very enthusiastic for Reagan. He supported Reagan for president very actively in 1976. He was the chairman for Rhode Island for Reagan for president in 1980 and in 1984. He was on the Republican National Finance Committee. He met with Reagan several times in the White House. Reagan wanted my father to be on the National Security Council. Twice asked him, also asked him to be U.S. ambassador to Hungary, which is actually a very important position because the Soviets and the Americans would often sit down and meet in Budapest, in Hungary. It was one of that in Vienna were places where they would have contacts. So the U.S. ambassador to Hungary was an important position. My dad said no. My dad had become very disenchanted with Reagan. You know, he says, you know, tax cuts for the rich, but what else did Reagan really accomplish for America?
Well, he was a good actor. I still kind of enjoy Death Valley days, but
that's true.
But you know, everybody that was supporting Reagan and that were real patriots were stunned when he chose George Bush as his vice presidential candidate, and that almost got him killed. Evidently, he did not know what kind of man Bush was. And my book, Mystery Babylon, exposes that. George Bush was CIA director when he sent Colonel Edward P. Catolo down to Columbia to build radio towers. That's the operation was called Operation Watchtower, and they used those towers to guide over 100 planes from Columbia into Albrook Air Force Base. The cargo was cocaine.
Oh my God! Yeah. Actually, I've been in touch with Robert Morrow, who is he's big on the JFK assassination.
Yes,
big
I met him.
Very
yes.
important. Oh, really? Oh, good.
I have met him down in Austin.
I'm sorry, your voice broke up a little bit.
I met him down in Austin.
Oh, really? Okay, great. Yeah, that's where he is. And I've run many of his blogs. He's done incredible exposés on the Bush family and drugs, and the Clintons and drugs. Oh my God, it makes your head spin. But you know, the point is, drugs means just oodles of cash, just suitcases of $100 bills. And, you know, the Jewish view and the view of other psychopaths is every man has his price. It's not true, but it's true of most men. You offer a guy $1 million or 10 million or 100 million bucks, a lot of people will blink and say, well, let me think about it. Next thing you know, you got a deal. And people sell out their country and their family and the future of their children and everything for, you know, the Cadillacs and the private jet and the lifestyle. And of course, I guess they don't believe in God. They don't believe in hell. They don't believe in karma. They don't believe in anything because they've just sold out every value that is sacred for money. Love money is the root of all evil, as the Bible says.
Yeah.
So,
of hell you shouldn't care. Of hell you shouldn't care. You can't go because you were there. And you stay till you pay, as I said before, from one of my old poems, I think.
Yeah. Well, Captain Ramsey, I think, is very valuable because he points out that a revolution can have two sides. It can have legitimate grievances, corruption, poverty, misery. Working class people can't get a leg up, can't make any progress in life. They're stuck at the bottom. And other people are squandering incredible unnecessary riches. You know, like Jay Leno having 40 cars, for example. You know, and other people can't even afford medicine, you know, and live in a dangerous neighborhood, and other people are dirt poor. So you've got the legitimate reasons for maybe a revolution. And then you've got some other group which is saying, this revolution could be good for us, for our secret agenda. And so in every case, the revolution may start off very moderate. These are our reasonable goals in overthrowing the government, or at first maybe not overthrowing, we just want to negotiate with the government to get reforms. And actually the American Revolution started off with the American patriots not seeking independence, but seeking for the British government to accord the Americans the same rights that Englishmen had, such as the right to vote and send members to Parliament. And they said, no, you're not Englishmen. You're subject to His Majesty. You belong to the colonies. You're not part of England. You have no right to have any representatives in the British Parliament. They said, well, we just fought for the British Empire, the French and Indian Wars for 7 years. We just fought for Britain. The flag flying outside the government buildings is the Union Jack flag. So how can you say we're not English? And he says, you're subject to His Majesty. We've told you that. And you're not having representatives in Parliament. So, you know, the Americans were trying to get their full rights as Englishmen. It was moderate. They weren't trying to cut heads off or establish communism, overthrow government, destroy the family, or do anything radical or extreme, or kill all the rich or anything like that. Because the American view was any man that works hard in America and doesn't booze it away or gamble it away, anybody can make something of himself in America. They just wanted equal opportunity.
Let's get back briefly here to, or as much time as you want, to Captain Ramsey. He wrote this book about 1952. That was as World War II was winding down. The Germans had been conquered by the Jews and are still controlled by the Jews. It's Germany that is providing the submarines for a Jewish fleet, all capable, armed with nuclear weapons, nuclear missiles. What did Captain Ramsey think about Germany and Adolf Hitler? I've said that it's my opinion that we fought on the wrong side. We should have allied with the Germans against the communists, and instead we allied with Uncle Joe Stalin. I mean, that's what Roosevelt called him, one of the greatest mass murderers in history. 60 million white Russians murdered. What did Ramsey think about it?
Well, Ramsey, you know, had been a professional soldier. He was a member of the upper class. He was from the nobility, descended from the Earls of Dalhousie up there in Scotland. He was careful with what he said. And, of course, he was for 14 years a member of the British Parliament. So he was a politician who understood it's not just what you say, but how you say it, and what you say and what you leave out. He was a careful man. He never really said, he personally, was very careful during his career. I mean, his book was pro-German, but during the time he was a politician, he did not say pro-German stuff. Admiral Sir Barry Domville, who was a member of the Right Club, did. He went and attended one of the Nuremberg, Nazi rallies, and was very impressed. Of course, Lloyd George visited with Adolf Hitler at the Berchtesgaden, at his eagle's nest and his beautiful alpine villa up there in the mountainside. So other people did and openly said pro-German stuff. Ramsey was very careful not to say pro-German or pro-Hitler or stuff. He talked about the Jews. So when the war did break out and Regulation 18B came into effect, they were absolutely unable to prove that Captain Ramsey had had any contact whatsoever with the German government. Because, at that point, it was the enemy government. Germany was the enemy on paper because of the declaration of war by England. People forget, by the way, England declared war on Germany. France declared war on Germany because Germany had a problem with Poland. And the Poles were massacring ethnic Germans on their side of the border. England and France declared war on Germany. Germany did not declare war on them. But in any case, Germany was technically an enemy country. He had no contact with them. In fact, when Captain Ramsey had been thrown in jail by Winston Churchill under Regulation 18B, the New York Times published a defamatory article saying that Ramsey was in touch with the German embassy in Dublin, Ireland, legation they called it. And Ramsey sued and won. But the judge, who was vicious and pro-Jew and pro-Freemason, awarded Ramsey £1 in damages. No, 1 farthing. It's like equivalent of $1 today. So, but he had been defamed, and that he had no contact with the German government whatsoever. So he was careful in his time. He says, I'm not pro-Nazi, I'm not pro-German, I'm not pro-enemy, I'm not in contact with the enemy. I'm just saying the Jews have instigated this war, and it's not beneficial for us, the British people. And that is as far as he went at that time. So he wasn't a fool shooting his mouth off and getting in trouble or walking into any traps. I mean, he kept the German government at arm's length, but they still arrested him. They still arrested him, even though he was quite careful in what he said. But he had this great reputation. There was a lot of anti-Jewish feeling, especially when the war broke out. And if I may, Clay, I'd like to play to you a British song from that time. It was sung to the tune of Onward Christian Soldiers, and it referred to all the Jews who were making money off the British war, providing food for the British Army, selling the uniforms to the British Army, and everything. And this song was to the tune of Onward Christian Soldiers.
Go right ahead. Go right ahead.
Okay, thanks. What I'd like to do is just read you the text, and then I'll play you a German singing it. The Germans during World War II had a radio station in English, broadcasting over to England and Ireland, and they would put on swing music and jazz and all kinds of great music, and they'd have comedies, and they would work in their message sometimes, and they'd have songs with sarcastic lyrics and whatnot. And it was basically to try to influence the many, many, many Brits. At least a third of the Brits completely understood this as a war for the Jews, it's a war for communism, instigated by the Jews and the Masons, and it would end up as a disaster for Britain and for all of the Christian Western countries if Germany were crushed and defeated, and that the war was an evil thing. So anyway, so this is the song. This is a British song. It's not a German song. It's a British song. And I'll explain some of the words to it. So it goes, onward, conscript army. Conscript means people drafted against their will. You have naught to fear. Then it refers to the defense secretary, Isaac Horb Elisha, who's a Jew, will lead you from the rear. In other words, he'll send you to the front to die. Clad by Monty Burton, that was a clothes maker and uniform maker, fed on lion's pies. It's kind of like the McDonald's type restaurant chain, but they were also providing food to the British Army. Fight for Yiddish conquests while the Briton dies. Onward, conscript army, marching on to war. Fight and die for Jewry as we did before. In other words, in World War I, when, you know, 1 million Brits died for nothing. I mean, didn't achieve hardly anything for Great Britain at all. In the next line, you must die for Poland. Pay your debt of thanks. Thanks for what? All your benefactors, international banks. So place against the Germans beneath the Jewish star. Onward toward the shambles. That's an old word which means a meat market or a slaughterhouse. Goy cattle that you are. That's pretty blunt. Goy cattle. Her persecuted Jewry will finance war again. Forward to the slaughter, for the Hebrews' gain. And the final line goes, driven towards the shambles like a flock of sheep, by lying propaganda, by their plans laid deep. And that's what Ramsey's talking about. Very sophisticated master plan with many details worked out. So for Israel, Moses Steve, he's the head of the Marks and Spencer department store chain. It's, you know, like some of the big department store chains in America, very well known in England. So for Israel, Moses Steve, you must fight and die, that Marks and Spencer's neon sign may still light up our sky. Forward unto Poland, 10 million men shall fall, that Judah's reign of terror may hold us all in thrall. And this was played. The Germans realized this song was going around England, and so they would play this. They would play this song to the people. Let me see if I can play this now. I'm going to have to adjust my sound here, and it's the frustrating thing was how many Brits had woken up, and Captain Ramsey and Sir Barry Donville and the 5th Duke of Wellington, all these people were aware that a horrible crime was being committed, that England had no reason whatsoever to be at war with Germany, and that the Jews and the Bolsheviks and the communists were the only ones who would profit from. Okay, so let me, hopefully I can get this to play. All right, 1 second, please. Can you hear me, Clay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Here we go. Can you hear that?
Yes, I can. That's
Yes,
loud and clear.
Okay, good.
Onward, conscript army, you have naught to fear. Isaac Horribly shall lead you from the rear. Led by Monty Burton, head on lion's high, fight for Yiddish conquest while the Britons die. Onward, conscript army, marching on the war. Fight and die for Jewry as we did before. You must die for Poland, pay your debt of thanks, for your benefactors, international banks. So place against the Germans beneath the Jewish star. Unlock all the shameless, soy-headed that you are. Poor persecuted Jewry will finance war again. Or what all the slaughter of the Hebrews gain. Driven for the chambers like a flock of sheep, by lying propaganda, by their plans laid deep. So for Israel, Moses Steve, you must fight and die, that Mark and Spencer's neon signs may still light up our sky. Almost unto Poland, 10 million shall fall, that Judah's reign of terror may hold us all in thrall.
Pretty good. That came through loud and clear.
Can you hear me?
Now I can. not very well. You might turn your mic up a
Okay,
little bit.
here we go. Okay, we're back now, I think. Yeah, so you see, there was a huge awareness of what was going on, going down, and it takes the nerve of the Jews to do something absolutely outrageous, such as to Regulation 18B, which is nothing more or less than the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, which authorizes U.S. troops to arrest U.S. citizens, take them to Guantanamo, and torture them, to waterboard them. That's authorized now under federal law for the U.S. military to kick your door down and drag you off to a foreign country, torture you. It's right in there. So people just can't believe they would actually do it. What happened is they did a false flag, MI5, which is like the British FBI. They did a false flag attack. They had some communist members of the Irish Republican Army plant bombs in some cloakrooms around London and blow up some hats and coats. Nobody was hurt. And then they said, oh, this is a national emergency. And so this is probably the Germans did it, or it's terrorism, and we can't have that. So in this emergency, Regulation 18B goes into effect, which means the government can just grab you off the street and just hold you forever, without trial, without evidence, without lawyer. You don't even know why you're arrested, and we just keep you forever. And in that panic, which of course the newspapers said, oh my God, cloakrooms are blowing up, hats and coats are flying in the air. So we have to have emergency laws now to protect the British Empire, or nobody's life is safe, especially not the hat. So they only rounded up a few people. But when Winston Churchill came in, after the British defeat, the Germans finally launched their westward attack, and they conquered Denmark, Norway, Holland, Belgium, Luxembourg, and then France beat the British. The British fled at Dunkirk, across the English Channel back to England. The British were beaten too by the Germans. Everybody was beaten. And so Neville Chamberlain resigned as prime minister. In came the guy who really wanted the war, the half-Jew, Winston Churchill, Jewish through his mother. And a Jew named Sir Henry Strakosch, a South African Jew, had bailed him out of his gambling debts and his other debts, his stock market speculation, and his losses blew through his entire fortune. So this Jew bailed him out. And after that, Churchill just did exactly what he was told. And he was for war with Germany because his Jew masters told him that. And he was half Jewish anyways through his mother. So as soon as Churchill came in, he said, okay, now how can we shut up all criticism of the war? Because once Germany had won these smashing victories, including beating the British Expeditionary Corps, the voices would be loud, saying, why are we even fighting this war? First of all, the Germans are incredible soldiers. We've just gotten our arses handed to us. What's the point of the whole thing anyways? British boys are dying. Hitler's anti-communist, and he's against the Jews. We don't see anything wrong with that either. So since Germany is victorious, let's sit down and negotiate with them. They're a tough opponent. It won't be easy to beat them. In fact, maybe they'll beat us. Maybe they'll land troops in England and we'll be fighting on our own streets, a month from now. So let's settle down and end this stupid war. So at that point, Churchill said, I'm going to use Regulation 18B and just round up the top 1,000 critics of the war policy. And so just grabbed Captain Ramsey, who had had no contact with the German government, had not been to Germany, unlike Prime Minister Lloyd George from World War I. He went and visited Hitler personally, unlike Sir Barry Domville, who had, as I said, been to one of the Nazi party rallies in Nuremberg, was very impressed with everything. But they grabbed Ramsey anyways. And the sad thing, Clay, is that he was within hours, Captain Ramsey was within hours of changing world history. Can we take just a little break, and then I can come back and maybe tell you some more about that?
Absolutely. Go right ahead. I'll tell you
Okay.
what. I have I have this thing I want to share with you because I think it's relevant. So I think that's about 8 or 9 minutes here. And
Okay.
I'm going to play that while you take a break and warm that coffee up.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. I'll be back shortly.
Okay.
One which I will reveal in a few moments. I will show exactly why this knowledge is a closely guarded secret, and you will discover that we are getting closer and closer to fulfilling this ancient prophecy. As the world leaders and their armies are covertly maneuvered into place in preparation for the events that led to the second coming of our Lord. Most importantly, you will see the exact reason why this prophecy will come true before the 1st of January, 2017. But first, you need to know just who I am for making such shocking statements. My name is Nathan Shepard. I have been a fervent Christian ever since I was a child. I have pursued a career in archaeology and theology, and I have dedicated 17 years of my life to studying the ancient scriptures in order to understand the place of the United States in the Bible prophecy. Until one day by chance I made a startling discovery that connected all the hidden clues. You must understand, the holy texts of the Bible are full of metaphors and symbolism because the prophets try to describe things that exist in the future using words available in their time. So when the prophets saw airplanes in their visions, the description would be mount up to heaven, referring to air travel and the Air Force, just like it will ascend above the heights of the clouds. It will be like the Most High is clearly a metaphor for reaching space. The fact that both of these metaphors refer to the nation known to the Bible scholars as Babylon, or Mystery Babylon, is no coincidence. Mystery Babylon is an end-times nation. How else would it be able to have an air force and reach space? And it is described in great detail by John the Apostle in the book of Revelation, and by the prophet Jeremiah and Isaiah. Babylon is called by the prophets a queen among nations and the lady of kingdoms.
Isaiah
It is the youngest
47:5.
and only superpower in the world.
Jeremiah
Babylon is a
47.
democracy weighed down by its huge government. Thou art wearied in the multitude of thy counsels.
Isaiah
Babylon
73.
destroys her own land with pollution and waste, because thou hast destroyed thy land.
Isaiah
I have
14.
polluted mine inheritance, and given them into thine hand.
Isaiah
Ask
47.
yourself this: how could an early day prophet know about pollution, since there is no such thing in ancient times? The answer may be already obvious. Babylon has the most powerful military force on the planet, and is called the hammer of the whole earth. The merchants of the world are made rich through trading with this nation, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich
Revelations
through the
18.
abundance of her delicacies. Is it starting to look like they are already talking about the United States of America? The descriptions get even more specific from now on. Babylon is praised in the entire world. How is the praise of the whole earth surprised? How has Babylon become an astonishment among the nations?
Jeremiah
This is a
51.
coastal nation with deep water ports and much international trade. And every shipmaster, and all the company in ships, and sailors, and as many as trade by sea, O thou that dwellest upon many waters, abundant in treasures, bear in mind that ancient Babylon, current-day Iraq, has very limited access to the sea. Babylon has a unique and remarkable beginning, different from other nations, and has been awe-inspiring from its birth. The U.S. is the first country to successfully become independent from a colonial empire, the British Empire. We speak the English language, and we are the descendants of the first British colonies. That is why England is like a mother to the U.S. It fits perfectly with the description in Jeremiah 50:12. More so, the mother of Babylon has the symbol of the lion. The royal symbol of England is a lion. And the mother of Babylon, in the end times, will be a state of major decline as the end nears. The British Empire that ruled the earth for 200 years is no more. Most of its colonies are independent. The British pound is no longer the world reserve currency. It has been replaced by the dollar, the currency of its daughter. The prophets also foretold that Babylon becomes proud and arrogant and does not consider its end. Therefore, hear now this: thou that art given to pleasure, that dwellest carelessly, that sayest in thine heart, I am, and none else beside me. How much she hath glorified herself, and lived deliciously, so much torment and sorrow give her. For she saith in her heart, I sit a queen, and am no widow, and shall see no sorrow. Does this sound like American exceptionalism? Even the name Mystery Babylon is deeply symbolic. It's a mystery because the prophets, at the time of the visions, didn't know of the existence of the North American continent. They literally had no idea what they were actually seeing and described it as best as they could. And in ancient times, Babylon was the greatest city in the world, just like the U.S. is the greatest country in the world today. Ancient Babylon was constructed by people that came from all parts of the ancient world, what we may call today immigrants, just like the United States. This is, again, very, very precise. What about the personification of Babylon in the scriptures as a woman? The prophets use the word her. This is another very precise clue given to us through metaphors and symbolism that are so abundant in the Holy Book. Think fast. What was the most widely known symbol of America? What is the image most immigrants and tourists associate with the U.S.? Is it a woman symbolizing liberty that sits in the harbor of the most important city in the United States? This is very cryptic but important, as it shows how accurate the prophecy is. The prophets talk about the U.S. by using its most recognizable monument, the Statue of Liberty. So why on earth are they also calling it the Whore of Babylon? The sculptor of the Statue of Liberty was Auguste Bertholdi, a Mason belonging to the Great Masonic Lodge in Paris. Before beginning this Statue of Liberty, Bertholdi was seeking a commission to construct a giant statue of the goddess of fertility. Isis, as it was known to the Egyptians, or Ishtar to the ancient Babylonians. The Romans also adopted this fertility goddess, but they changed the name to Libertas in Latin. Liberty in English, Libertas, is the mythological equivalent of Isis and Ishtar. Therefore, the Statue of Liberty is also the statue of Isis, or as the Babylonians called her, Ishtar, the goddess of fertility, love, and sex. According to the ancient pagan rituals, one can only be purified of sin after intercourse with a temple priest or a priestess of Ishtar. In return for this salvation, a gift offering was needed. Ishtar was the patron mother of the temple priestesses and priests. She was the mother of what we would call today prostitution. This is why Ishtar was seen by early Christians as the Whore of Babylon. And that is why the Statue of Liberty, the symbol of America, is called by the prophets the Whore of Babylon. Do you think it is a coincidence that the U.S., the home of the greatest and most famous statue of Ishtar, provides 65% of pornographic movies and adult entertainment to the world? Is it just another coincidence that this is the country where sexual liberation originated and spread to the rest of the world? It's not. It's just like the scriptures foretold. For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. The last clue is the description of Babylon as the daughter of Chaldea. Chaldea is a region in the Middle East, mostly inhabited by Semitic tribes during the time of the prophets. Out of the family of Semitic tribes, the most powerful and influential one today is represented by the Jews, Israelites. According to Scripture, Babylon would be home to multitudes of Jews who left the Holy Land. Today, the largest population of Jewish people is found in the United States. Furthermore, 48% of American billionaires are Jewish and have made their wealth in the U.S., contributing to its rise as the world's only superpower. You might recognize some of the names on this list.
Ben Bernanke, George Soros, Howard Schultz, Levi Strauss, Michael Dell, Larry Ellison,
the daughter
Sheldon
of the Chaldeans. The nation that the Jewish people helped rise to superpower status is the United States of America. The U.S. today has the most powerful economy and military, controls worldwide commerce, is proud and arrogant, has the most developed Air Force and space program, and is the envy of the world. It houses the Whore of Babylon, is the daughter of the British Empire, and the child of the Chaldeans. And unfortunately, for every living American, Mystery Babylon. Why? Babylon is suddenly fallen and destroyed. Howl for her. Take balm for her pain. If so be she may be healed. A sound of a cry cometh from Babylon, and great destruction from the land of the Chaldeans. Because the Lord hath spoiled Babylon, and destroyed out of her the great voice. Therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death, and mourning, and famine, and she shall be burned with fire, For strong is the Lord God who judgeth her. At the noise of the taking of Babylon, the earth is moved, and the cry is heard among the nations. Sit thou silent, and get thee into darkness, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for thou shalt no more be called the Lady of Kingdoms. All three prophets tell of the fall of Babylon, the destruction of the United States of America as we know it. This is not an event that happened to ancient Babylon in the past. History has never recorded the fall of a state or a city in the way described by the prophets. And just like all the events accurately predicted by the Bible, the two world wars, the rise and fall of communism, and the return of the Jewish people to their homeland, and so many others, this too will happen. The only questions left to ask are, who will cause its fall? When and how? They come from a far country, from the end of heaven, even the Lord and the weapons of his indignation to destroy the whole land. For out of the north there cometh up a nation against her, which shall make her land desolate. For I will raise and cause to come up against Babylon an assembly of great nations from the north country, draw a straight line north of the U.S. through the Arctic, the end of heaven, and you will find the answer. Russia is the great enemy of Babylon, the enemy destined to destroy it. The Holy Scripture is again very precise. Even though it has been written centuries before the U.S. or Russia became world powers, it clearly describes both countries that are prophesied to start World War III. And at the start of World War III, Russia will use a very special weapon, the weapon of indignation against the whole territory of the U.S., and then lead the invasion of a great assembly of nations. Now that we know who is responsible, the next logical question is, when will this happen? As you have seen before, we are going through the biblical end times. Babylon America has fulfilled the prophecies that foretold its coming, and now, according to the Bible, it will meet its demise. The clues about when the great disaster shall befall it are hidden in the book of Daniel, another major biblical prophet. In chapter 1140 of his prophecies describes a great war fought by two kings at the end times, one from the north and one from the south. So, if we could connect these two kings to two current world leaders, we would know how close we are to the destruction of Babylon. The key to understanding the clue of the two kings is the position of Jerusalem, because this is where Daniel had his revelations. To the north of Jerusalem is St. Petersburg, birthplace of Vladimir Putin. What else does the prophecy say about the king of the north? And the king shall do according to his will. Putin does what he wants. He controls the media, the military, and the economy of Russia. Neither shall he regard the gods of his fathers, nor regard any god, for he shall magnify himself above all. The fact that gods is not written with a capital letter is a clear clue to what exactly the prophet is referring to. Communism. The gods of the communists are Lenin, Marx, Stalin, who have ruled Russia for over 80 years. They are practically worshipped by the Russian people, and statues and pictures of them were everywhere across the USSR. But as prophecy foretold, Putin distanced himself from communism and denounced its flaws and sins against Russia and the Russian people. He shall magnify himself above all. Russian media portrays Putin as a huntsman, judo expert, chess master, brilliant politician and diplomat, pilot, and overall strongman, above the former communist leaders in every way. But in his estate shall he honor the God of forces. Russian military spending has exploded since Putin came to power. This is how he honors the God of forces. There it is. Vladimir Putin is undoubtedly the king of the north that will guide Russia in the end times. But what about the king of the south? Geographically, he has to be born in the south of Jerusalem. Barack Obama was born either in Hawaii or Kenya, depending on who you want to believe, both of which are in the south of Jerusalem. But what does the prophet say about him? And in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. Never in our history have so many people disagreed with U.S. policies or hated the United States, Russia, China, North Korea, a big part of the Muslim world, including Syria, Egypt, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the list goes on and on. Remember the assembly of great nations that invade America. These clues prove that Obama is the king of the South as the prophecies foretold. So if Barack Obama and Vladimir Putin are the kings of prophecy, then their war must start before they leave office. That means January 2017. The end of Babylon is very, very near, and we are directly on course for this prophecy to be fulfilled. And Obama is playing his part to the letter. And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him. These words are coming true as we speak. Remember, according to the prophecy, Russia must unexpectedly use the weapon of indignation first, and then invade alongside its allies. Alarmingly, Obama's push has started as far back as 2011. Syria. Syria is an oil-exporting country with strong ties to Russia and home of the only Russian naval base in the Mediterranean. Clashes broke out between CIA-backed and funded protesters and government forces in April 2011. The Obama administration armed any opposition force in Syria, although some of the rebels were openly Islamic fundamentalists and jihadists. On the 21st of August 2013, chemical weapons were used, and Obama pushed for a military intervention in Syria in a very tense standoff. Both Russia and the U.S. deployed a huge number of warships off the Syrian coast. Putin blinked first and forced Syria to surrender its chemical weapons to be destroyed under international supervision. Ukraine. CIA-backed and funded protests against the pro-Russian leadership. Putin has lost one of his key allies in the region. Although it annexed Crimea, Russia is now in an undeclared war with its eastern neighbor. Even more alarmingly, a massive amount of NATO hardware has been sent to Russia's border. Russia itself. Project Star Wars, a missile defense shield, is being set up in Europe and the U.S. as we speak. Officially, its target is Iran, but the real target is Russian nuclear weapons capability. And Putin knows this too well, and this clip shows.
Довод НАТО таков. Ракетный щит возводится не против вас, а
Missile
против
shield
Ирана.
was not built against you, but against Iran. Putin laughs. You really make me laugh.
The Ukrainian conflict saw the Western powers led by Obama imposing drastic economic sanctions on Russian banking and energy sectors, key parts of Russian economy. Interestingly, economic sanctions have preceded every U.S. war in the 21st century. Russian oil exports were the target of a secret deal signed between Obama and Saudi Arabia that caused the price of oil to dive from $100 a barrel to close to $40. Russia is dependent on oil exports as 40% of its budget comes from it. That is why the Russian ruble, the Russian currency, has lost 50% of its value since August 2014. That means that people in Russia can only buy half the stuff they used to afford. Once poverty starts kicking in, the Russians will want blood, and Putin will be left with very few options. Because when Russia falls apart, war will be the only option. And the King of the North knows this too well. You are now witnessing the last months, maybe weeks, before the Russian attack that destroys Mystery Babylon. Obama's America. The Bible tells us all about the Russian attack, and most importantly, Putin's weapon of indignation. A weapon unlike anything the world has ever seen before. This weapon can hit an entire country. How has Babylon become a desolation among the nations? This weapon makes the U.S. military unable to respond, broken because of what looks like equipment malfunction. How is the hammer of the whole earth cut asunder and broken? The mighty men of Babylon have forborne to fight. They have remained in their holes. Their might hath failed, because the spoiler is come upon her, even upon Babylon, and her mighty men are taken. Every one of their bows is broken, and this weapon leads Babylon silent and in darkness. Sit thou silent, and get thee into darkness, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for thou shalt no more be called the Lady of Kingdoms. There is only one weapon that can affect an entire continent, leave the military unable to defend itself, and plunge America into silence and darkness. Vladimir Putin's weapon of indignation is an electromagnetic pulse. An EMP, or electromagnetic pulse, is an electromagnetic discharge that fries sensitive circuits within minutes, even seconds. Most modern-day appliances, the gadgets we use daily, and even the U.S. power grid all have sensitive circuits built in. Think of a normal blackout when you don't have any lights, heating, or internet. Only an EMP blackout is permanent and on a large scale. This means you can also say goodbye to telecommunications, transportation, and even utilities. Silence and darkness. Military command and control, as well as most of the high-tech equipment, is very vulnerable to an EMP. One blast will reduce our army to fighting using weapons that existed before the 1900s. This weapon fulfills Bible prophecy to the letter. It's swift, has a huge area effect, knocks out our military, breaks the hammer of the earth, and sets the stage for the Assembly of Nations to invade. And all it takes is not 100, not even 50, but just one warhead to be detonated above the U.S., and the effects would be irreversible. EMP device that can be strategically detonated at an altitude of 20 miles above the surface of our country that will permanently cripple our power grid and plunge America into silence and darkness. The real danger of an EMP is it could happen without any signs or warnings, and the King of the North has drilled his soldiers to do exactly that. There's never been so many nuclear drill exercises targeting the U.S. in recent history. Putin is preparing to fulfill his role according to the Holy Book. The effects of the EMP will destroy America as we know it: looters, famine, civil unrest, and finally, the foreign invasion, exactly as the scriptures predicted. Therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death, and mourning, and famine, and she shall be burned with fire, for strong is the Lord God who judgeth her. Without hospitals or pharmacies being able to function, people won't be able to take their necessary medication. Pandemics and disease will break out, caused by no waste pumping or garbage collecting, and lack of any basic personal hygiene. As the supply of food breaks down, famine starts setting in, and with it looting and food riots. Some Americans riot on Black Friday over a toaster. Can you imagine what would happen during an EMP when all the power is out? FEMA, law enforcement, and other state agencies will be overwhelmed. Firefighters will be unable to react as their equipment will not work. Fires will break out, and the cities shall be burned with fire. And after the nation destroys itself from within, and without our network of communication, most Americans will have no idea the invasion has begun.
All right, enough of that. John DeNugent, are you still with me?
Yeah, I am. It's very interesting, Clay. Thanks for playing that for me and for everybody else who was listening. The only objection I would have to that, I've been very familiar with the concept of an EMP, electromagnetic pulse, but the United States could do that to Russia too, unless they have all their stuff hardened, and maybe they have. I mean, you can harden stuff. I've heard that the Russians were hardening their things, and I've heard that the U.S. military was hardening key things. So the civilians might die like flies. That doesn't mean the U.S. military doesn't have hardened stuff where the idea is that this pulse would fry all computer chips and nothing would function. But the United States has known about this for decades, and so have the Soviets. So the two militaries might still be able to operate, but the people would die like flies. But they could do that to, the United States government could do that to Russia too. So that's my only question, what would be the point of that? I mean, they might do it, and then just millions of Russians and millions of Americans would starve and die of disease. And race riots, race wars. I mean, what I would see, based on the mood in the country right now, I could see gangs of blacks and whites and browns and yellows and, armed gangs roaming around looking for food. And if you see an attractive woman, just take her while you're at it. I could see it degenerating quickly into racial conflict.
Well, look what happened in Ferguson, and look what happened in Boston,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's already
I think it's very important to be in good with the Lord and have good karma, be a religious and good person, and say your prayers every night, because I know for a fact I've had 6 occult experiences this summer, Clay. I've talked about some of them right on my blog. I've described them in detail. I had one just before the Charleston shooting. I had another one just before that live TV shooting of that reporter in Virginia and 2 other white people. The woman survived. The cameraman and the TV reporter were killed by this black homosexual. And it's absolutely real. It really happened. And I have had these weird experiences, and I've never had them before in my life, telling me something really big is going to happen. And I think it's the way that the angels are urging me to start my spiritual movement. And I think the most important thing a spiritual movement can say to people is, do your duty. Don't be afraid to lose your life, because you're going to lose it anyways. You're going to see corpses. You're going to see death and starvation and tears. You're going to hear screams of women being raped. I mean, it's horrible things maybe coming are right ahead of us, Clay. And those who are mentally tough and will continue with the mission will survive and will prevail. And others are going to freak out and commit suicide and go on rampages and get drunk and sputter around. But I think we're going to, a judgment day is absolutely coming. Did you ever see that movie, The Road, Clay?
The Road?
Yeah, it's quite a good movie.
I don't think
Charlize Theron was in it, that South African actress, white South African actress, and Viggo Mortensen was in a lot of the Lord of the Rings movies. It's about America after some sort of catastrophe has happened. And it's like a devastated world. And it's what it's like for people living in the post-apocalyptic world. They shot most of it in Pennsylvania. And it's just the sky is gray all the time, and there's ruins everywhere. It's a scary movie. Coleman McCarthy, a great American novelist from Providence, Rhode Island, by the way, Irish-American. He wrote many important novels, such as No Country for Old Men, which is made into a movie, of course, with Tommy Lee Jones of Texas and other, important people. It's a very gritty, realistic novel about what America would be like if everything collapsed. And I'm telling you, nasty people would come out of the woodwork. There's scenes of cannibalism in there, and horrors, and good people giving up and killing themselves because they're afraid they're going to be eaten, because there's a shortage of protein, and there are some people who are holding other people. They just come down, they hold you in the basement, they come down and just amputate your arm or your thigh just because they need meat. There's no meat. And a lot of the soil has been polluted, and you can't always eat the food. You can't always grow crops. So, man, it's a nightmare scenario. It's grim.
Well,
but it's interesting.
I think I had the answer to that, and that was the whole Liberty Village concept. If we brought soldiers in homeless, gave them a place to stay, cheap structures, teepees, cabins, mud huts. I mean, you can, adobe, there's two kinds of people that live in adobe homes, the very poor and the very rich. And if we establish these little sanctuaries, with and you could protect some of your electronics with a simple Faraday cage.
Really?
That's easy to build. And if you got people together, working together, different skills. I can't work on a Harley, I can't work on an automobile, but I can use a computer. So if you've got different people living together, living near each other, maybe a central restaurant, a central store, you buy your goods together, basically a co-op, not communist thing, but a village with that functions as a co-op, so you can get everything that you need and share it. Use it together to protect yourself and your families. And, you could have a Mexican village down the road. You could have a white village right where you're at. The same thing could be done in neighborhoods. If we just talk to each other. We don't talk to each other anymore. We don't go to town hall meetings. We don't do that. We don't communicate here. And I think that's really our downfall. We don't have to change everybody. I think the Bible's a valuable tool, and you can share the information in it without trying to recruit people into your church. Oh, you're a Methodist? Well, we're Baptist. Well, you need to join the Church of Christ. You need to be a Catholic. You need to be a Muslim. You need to be a Jew. Bullshit. That's bullshit, folks. You don't have to do that. We're Americans. We live in America. I live in Texas. Let's work together in the states we're in the counties we're in and the towns we're in. And then you can make a change. If you're working together, you can eliminate criminal politicians, whether they're your mayors or your governors. You can eliminate just by getting the truth out. I think we're really overlooking where our strengths lie. They want to make you feel bad for being white. That's communism in action. They want you upset with the Mexicans. I don't want to kill any Mexicans. I don't want to live with them. I don't want to live with the blacks, but I don't want to go out and kill them all to make room for me. I think we got enough room. We got so many family farms out there that Archer Daniels, Midland, and Monsanto are buying up because they don't want us to have it.
Well, it's not true. Everything you just said applies to America. It doesn't apply to England. England and Germany are ant heaps crawling with people. Several of my British supporters have told me England is so overpopulated, it's sickening. It's like about 60 million people, and it's a small country. It's just wall-to-wall people. Everywhere you go, you see people walking. It's like China. It's an ant heap. They can't be bringing in 1 million Syrian quote refugees into Germany or into England, and the prices, the rents are so high. The price of a house is so high because so many people need housing. It pushes the price up. Up here now, this is a classic example of our American situation where I live, Clay, in Ontonagon and Upper Peninsula of Michigan. There are 300,000 people in this entire region here, 99% white. You can get a house here for $17,000. The whole county is 6,000 people. It's the size of the state of Rhode Island, one county, 6,000 people. There's 1 million people around in the 6,000 here. Empty, just wolves and deer and bears, and some nice friendly white people. So it can, in America, there's plenty of room for blacks and browns and Chinese. There's room for everybody. That's not true in Europe, though. That's not true in Europe. I mean, you drive through Germany, and you leave the village, then there's the outlying farms, but these farms already. Then you cross to the next farm. That farm belongs to the next village. Next thing you know, you hit the next village, and then you hit farms, and then more farms, and then you hit the next village. There's no woods at all. There may be a thin little row of trees between two fields. There's no more woods. It's just solid. Everything is cities, suburbs, villages, and farms. And bam, there's no place where you can roam out in the woods and be by yourself. It's just an ant heap. They can't let in millions of blacks and browns and yellows, and they especially can't let in Muslims. The terrible problem, Clay, is the estimates are between 72 and 75% of these so-called refugees are young Muslim males between 18 and 35. That's the age of breeders and fighters. And the evidence is a large percentage of these guys are ISIS soldiers. And they're here to slaughter the whites and destroy Christianity. And a rabbi, I have it on my blog at johndenugent.com, a French rabbi said in French and in Hebrew, and they have English subtitles, he says, this is a wonderful time because Islam will destroy Europe and Christianity. And then our Messiah will come. He's just openly saying that. Wonderful time because Europe will be destroyed and Christianity will be destroyed. The rabbi's openly stating it. And I know he was accurate because I understand French, and he was saying that sentence in French. And that's exactly what he said. I looked as he actually said, it's wonderful Europe is being destroyed by Islam. So that's what's going down. And I think there's going to be a huge race war. And frankly, it could be that Russia will be the salvation of the world. I mean, you know that Fatima prophecy 100 years ago, those little girls in Portugal. was supposedly that Russia would awaken and that Russia would save the world.
I think
Hard to
that was
imagine.
Edgar Casey's prediction also.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. He said some very, very interesting things. Actually, you know, the Wikipedia article on Edgar Casey was censored because he had a lot of, there was a couple of paragraphs about his views of the Jews. And then they took it all out, and then they just said, well, he just had the typical anti-Semitic attitudes of his generation, you know, back then. That's how people were. But actually, he had some very detailed remarks about the Jews. And a friend of mine who's very familiar with Edgar Casey said that a book had been written, but was never published by his organization, Society for Enlightenment, I think, down there in, I think it's Newport News or Virginia Beach, Virginia Beach. And in it, of course, he believed in reincarnation. He was a Christian, but he also believed in reincarnation. And he said, the Jews are reincarnated criminals. And I said, wow, did he really say that? He says, yeah. And they've never published that book. But it's consistent with what I've read of Edgar Casey. Edgar Casey believed, this is sort of fascinating, can't be proven, but when you look at everything Edgar Casey says, it's mighty interesting, because he was a very honest man, that Atlantis was sort of like 10,000 years ago, a kind of America. Started out small, but brave and virtuous, family values and religious people, and became a great country, finally became an empire, became corrupt and degenerate, and a group called the Sons of Baal, which I think were the Jews in an earlier incarnation, came on. They didn't believe in God, but they believed in Satan, and they sacrificed children, they believed in orgies and sex and money, and they began drilling deep into the earth, triggering earthquakes. They didn't care about environmental damage. They're going right into the crust of the earth, cracking it open, getting gold and stuff out, and copper. And another group rose up to oppose them, called the Sons of the Law of One. This is all Edgar Casey saying this. And kind of like Tea Party type, or let's restore the original America of freedom and bravery and, you know, all the patriotic values that once made our country great. But I guess they fought like Boy Scouts or something, because the Sons of Baal beat them and prevailed. And people began leaving Atlantis for generations. They could see this is going to end up bad. And actually, some of the outlying areas of Atlantis were settling down and were swamped and inundated. So before Atlantis disappeared, you know, Atlantis just sunk beneath the waves suddenly in one day. But before that, outlying areas were already sinking because of all this drilling, which is damaging the crust of the earth. And so people moved to what is now Egypt. These were people who were disgusted with Atlantis, what it had become, left it, and moved out of the sphere of influence of Atlantis, which is also part of Western Europe, and moved to get away from it and founded the Egyptian civilization. These are like white people, and there's already the Egyptian people, which is, you know, a coffee-colored skinned race, Mediterranean people, and they came as sort of a white ruling class with their technology and their civilization. And ancient Athens, 10,000 years ago, the first Athens, was another group of rebels against Atlantis who were disgusted and left. And Atlantis was so wicked at the end, and the Sons of Baal had completely taken charge, kind of like now with America, where the Jews have completely taken charge, and the Masons. And so they attacked this ancient Egypt and this ancient Athens, and it was a huge war. They conquered a lot of Egypt, and but Athens fought back and defeated Atlantis. Disastrous defeat for Atlantis. Just like, you know, the Greeks later on fought the Persians in, you know, historic times. But then, I guess God or whatever, Atlantis sunk beneath the waves, dozens of millions of people drowned, and Atlantis was gone. But the tidal wave from the sinking of Atlantis went all throughout the Mediterranean, wiped out Athens, and flooded Egypt briefly, too, and a lot of people were killed. And so the Egyptian high priest said to Solon, who was one of the great founders of the historic Athens that we know, Plato and Aristotle and the Greek tragedies and the Spartans, in our period, 300, 400 BC. Before that was Solon, and he visited Egypt, and the Egyptian high priest said to him, "You were so wiped out that only the farmers and the people living on the mountaintops survived this huge tidal wave and disaster. And so you don't even know that you saved the world. Your ancestors saved the world. But we know, because we weren't as damaged and devastated as you were, but the history of Athens was glorious. But that's what happened to Atlantis, 10,000 BC. It seems like the same thing is happening now, that America is like Atlantis. Starts off virtuous and brave and prosperous with good families and belief in God, and then it gets taken over by an evil force. It becomes open Satan worship, murder of children, sex, drugs, rock and roll, the whole thing, degeneracy, and the good forces failed to save it. And then God, or whatever, Atlantis is destroyed. And the world begins anew. And it's very similar to the Bible story of the flood. An evil situation is destroyed by water. It may refer to the same event, actually. Maybe the Bible story of the flood and the story of Atlantis is two different versions of the same story.
I believe it is.
But
I believe it is.
Yeah. We could use a cleansing. I'm sick and tired of the way things are going now. If 90% of the people die, well, I believe their souls are immortal. They'll come back. They'll have another life. But I can't stand seeing Obama and these traitors, Republicans. We have to support. You saw Ann Coulter went ballistic the other day after watching the Republican debate. She says, "I'm sick and tired of hearing about how we have to support Israel." She said, "The effing Jews," she said, right in her tweet. People are sick of it. People are sick of gay marriage and illegal aliens pouring in.
$10 million a day goes to Israel. I mean, why are we doing that? Can't we use that money here?
Well, I know there's a coffee shop here in town, and the girl who worked there said, "If my husband and I had $35, we could get his car running again, and he could get a job. But they don't have $35. I mean, so many people are living in poverty in America right now. And Israel is one of the richest countries on earth. Why don't these Jewish billionaires kick in some money from all their bonuses?"
I am.
But
right now, if I hadn't been old enough to get Social Security after my accident, I'd be living under a bridge. So I've got Social Security here, but that's not enough to do all that I need to do to restore the business that they tried to kill me to stop.
Yeah.
They failed. Obviously, they failed killing me, but they did manage to destroy every business that I had. My businesses were worth $1 million each.
I know all about it, Clay. I know all about it. The last lucrative business that I had, well, I was teaching at a school in Boston, and the Jews figured out who I was. And that was it. They didn't renew my contract. I was making about $3,000 a month 15 years ago. That was the last decent job I had. And the Jews destroyed my career. So I've been living in poverty and hand to mouth for the last 15 years straight. Because they understand that patriots like you and me, Clay, if we had the money and the capital, we could set the world on fire. And that's what Captain Ramsey is saying. The only reason the Jews win is they have money and they stick together.
Well, it's kind of like Carl Kling said, if you got your very own printing press and you can print your very own money, pretty soon you buy up the whole neighborhood,
Well, you see, if we get bombed back to the Stone Age, if we have a war with Russia, the paper money will be worth nothing. It's going to be barter and providing services and providing food and protection and doing things in the real world. And your word will be your bond. A man who keeps his promises will survive, and a man who breaks his promises and is treacherous will have no friends, and he will die. he and his wife and kids will die. It could be that the earth will be cleansed and go back to very rough times, and only the strong and the good will survive by banding together. But that's the Aryan view of the history of the world, is that the rise and fall of great empires, and then you rebuild and the world starts off fresh again. Maybe that's what's going to have to happen. So that's certainly what Edgar Casey was implying, is that something big's going to happen. But I think I think the fact that Russia is now bombing in Syria is a brushback pitch at the United States. It's saying, watch what our jets can do, watch what our military can do here. and the fact that they're flying right alongside American jets is very up close and personal.
All right, tell people, we've only got a few minutes left here. Tell people how they can get a copy of your audio book.
Okay, well, of course, my audiobooks are free online at archive.org. You can certainly look up Captain Ramsey, Ramsay, and I had the introduction is already up as an audiobook. And then today I'm going to be finishing the audiobook of his actual book called The Nameless War. That's the name of his book. 1952, he was disgusted with politics. He'd lost his career because of the Jews, and he wrote this magnificent book called The Nameless War. In other words, the war against the Gentiles and against Christianity via secretly backing all these revolutions. So the people don't realize that the revolution they're fighting for is really going to bring the Jews to power and not them. Great book by Captain Ramsey. And you can also go to my website, johndenugent.com. And I really appreciate you having me once again on your show, Clay. It's always a pleasure. And you are a real American.
All right. John, thank you. And God bless you all, folks. Go to freeamerican.com. If you appreciate this information, you want to do something to oppose this new world order, which really should be called the Jew world order, back me. Make a donation at freeamerican.com, or get some of my books and some of my magazines or some of my videos at shop.freeamerican.com. God bless you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.